In Inquiry 11.1, we're going to create a dichotomous key. A dichotomous key is a tool that scientists use in order to identify different living organisms. They may have a large dichotomous key where they have organized all the different plant species, or they may have a dichotomous key with animal species, or they may have a dichotomous key that has both. But we're going to keep our dichotomous keys very simple with just some basic animals, and we're going to try to make it as easy of a process as possible. But again, the key to remember here is the purpose of a dichotomous key, which is to organize living things so they're easy to identify. And we're going to use their characteristics. Throughout this whole unit, starting with Lesson 1 all the way through to now, we have focused on some different characteristics of living things. We did spend a lot of time talking about their development and reproduction and so forth, but we also have looked at different characteristics of plants and animals. And so in this lesson, we're going to kind of tie up those ends in making our dichotomous key. So what I want you to do first is open your assignment with Cami. And when you do, you will see 2 pages of the organisms that we're going to use for our dichotomous key. So I'm just going to scroll through and let us see those first. We have a monkey, a rat, a jay, like a blue jay, a dragonfly, a wasp, a chipmunk, a human, although a very barbaric looking human, a pigeon. Then on the second page of animals, we have a fox, a robin, an eagle, a butterfly, a lion, an elephant, a fly, and a zebra. And then what you'll see on page 3 is a template that we're going to use. Now this template might not end up being big enough for you when you're making your key. If it's not, then you can just continue on in the empty space on the page if you need more lines than just 7. Okay, so I'm going to give you an example of how to begin your dichotomous key. I'm not going to finish it for you, but I am going to give you a good example to get you started. But you will either need to make your own dichotomous key, or if you use my examples, you will need to continue and finish the dichotomous key until all of the organisms that are pictured have been identified on the key. Okay, so I'm just looking again, just scrolling back and looking at my pictures of my organisms here. And one thing that stands out to me is that if I wanted to divide all of these organisms just into 2 big groups, one thing that really stands out to me is the fact of if they have fur or no fur, or maybe hair. So we'll say hair or fur or no fur. So I'm going to use that as my first item on my dichotomous key. So on number 1A, see, I need to change my font size. Okay, on A, I'm going to start out with hair or fur. And for B, I'm going to put no hair or fur. So I'm dividing all of these organisms into 2 groups based on whether or not they have hair or fur. So if they do have hair or fur, then I'm going to continue on to line 2. But if they do not have hair or fur, then I'm going to continue to line 3. Okay, on line 2, I've got to look at all of the organisms that have hair or fur, and I've got to divide them into 2 groups. So I'm going to scroll back up here and take a quick glance at just the ones that have hair or fur. And one thing I notice about the ones that have hair or fur is that they're either going to have a tail or they're not going to have a tail. So on line 2, that's how I'm going to divide them up. I'm going to divide them up into the ones that have a tail or the ones that have no tail. And you may have noticed the only one that has no tail in the examples is the human. So I'm going to go ahead and identify the human right here on line 2B. For line 2A, though, I've got to do a little more distinction or differentiation between them. So I'm going to go to line 4. Okay. Now, back on number 1, I'm now on line 3. Line 3 was all of the organisms that had no hair or fur. So I'm going to scroll back up here and look at all the ones that have no hair or fur, and that would be the fly, the butterfly, the robin, the pigeon, the wasp, the dragonfly, the blue jay. So out of those, I'm going to distinguish between those as the ones that have a beak, because as you notice, the birds all have a beak, or the ones that have no beak. Okay, if they have a beak, then I'm going to continue on to line 5, if they have a beak. If they do not have a beak, then I'm going to say go to line 6. Okay, hopefully you're catching on, but I'm going to do a few more examples with you to get you going. Number 4, line 4, are my animals that had hair or fur but have a tail. Okay, so if I think back to all of the ones that have hair, fur, and have a tail, I have a zebra, an elephant, a lion, a fox, a chipmunk, a monkey, and a rat. So something that stood out to me was the elephant because it had tusk. So on line 4, I'm going to put tusk or no tusk. So if it has a tusk, the only one in our pictures that have a tusk is an elephant. So I'll go ahead and identify the elephant. But if it has no tusk, we've got to go a little further and differentiate a little bit more. So we will go to line 7. Okay. And I'm a little off on my spaces here. It's okay. I made my font too big. But I'm not going to worry about that. When I go to line 5, on line 5, I'm supposed to be looking for the things that have a beak. So if I go to line 5 and I want to distinguish the ones that have a beak, I'm going to go back up here and look at all my birds. Again, I have the eagle, the robin, the pigeon, and the blue jay. And one thing I noticed that's standing out to me is the blue jay has this tuft of feathers on top of its head. So I think I'm going to use that as my distinguishing characteristic. So on line 5, I'm going to go with head, feather, tuft. And if it has that, the only bird we have as an example that has that on our page is the jay. So I'm going to go ahead and identify the jay. And then my other distinguishing characteristic to distinguish these, I'm going to say no, head, feather, tuft. And so I'll have to continue on. So I'm going to say go to line 8 if it has no head, feather, tuft. Okay. Now on line 6, we said it was the things that had no hair or fur and also had no beak. So that's pretty much my insects. So if I go back up here and look, I've got the fly, the butterfly, the wasp, and the dragonfly. So something I noticed about them is that the wasp has a stinger. So I'm going to use that as my next distinguishing characteristic. So if it has a stinger, then it's going to be the wasp, so I can identify the wasp. And then I've got to continue on with the rest. So I'm going to say the ones with no stinger. And they would have to go to line 9. Okay. Now, I'm going to use number 7 as my last example, but you would have to continue on until you have identified all of the animals pictured. Okay, so on line 7, I have my animals that have hair or fur but have no tusk. So if I go back up here and look, that would be my zebra, my lion, the fox, the chipmunk, the monkey, and the rat. So one thing I noticed about those was I noticed the lion's mane. It's the only one that has that mane around its face. So I'm going to use that as my line 7 characteristic. Okay, so mane, of course, would identify the lion. But then I've got all my other ones that I would have to continue with. So I'm going to say no mane, no mane would need to go on to line 10. Okay, now I'm going to stop there with my example, but if you are using my example, I want you to continue on until you have identified all of the other animals. Now, there is no more template space, but you can always type in the blank space that is on your page. Anywhere on your page where there is blank space, feel free to write all over it, use it. Just try to keep it as organized as possible. Okay, so I got you to line 7, but we know that you've got to continue on line 8 with the things that are basically the birds that have no head feather tuft. And then on line 9, you've got to continue on with the insects with no stinger. And on line 10, you've got to continue on with the mammals that have no mane. And so continue on with this example, or you can start from the beginning and use a different classification key. Either way is fine as long as you understand and you complete the assignment. If you have any questions, let me know.